Has everyone had a really nice time at Front End United? Hooray! I'm going to ruin that for you now. You're going to go home on a downer. Because I'm going to bring up a very difficult subject for me. I've talked about a lot of really hardcore and difficult to share things on stage in the past, but today I'm going to push the envelope. I'm going to talk about Taylor Swift. Has anyone heard of the artistic visionary and groundbreaking country musician Taylor Swift, with a show of hands? Most people have. A lot of music fans, a lot of culture vultures here, I see. Specifically, I want to talk about Taylor Swift's website. And I have to credit Alex Hearn here, who writes about technology in The Guardian, because he discovered this a few months ago. He discovered that TaylorSwift.com had entered a really interesting phase in its design iteration. Now, if you look it up now, it looks different. It looks completely different, so there's no point doing that. But I've been able to capture what that website looked like at that time, thanks to Alex. Would you all like to see this? It's amazing. It's really good. Right, check this out. Okay, so I know what you're probably thinking. You're probably thinking that my laptop's gone to sleep, or I fucked up and I've left a slide out of the presentation. I fucked up because I put the cursor in the middle of the screen as well. But no, that's what Taylor Swift's website looked like for days, weeks. There was nothing there, okay? My first thought was this is derivative, because there's already a tradition in music to just make things entirely black. So you had this album by Metallica in the early 90s called the Black Album, well named. They fucked up because they put their own logo in there. That's not black, it's grey. And they also have one of those curly, racist, libertarian snake things that you get. They stole the idea from Spinal Tap, who in the 80s, they're a fictional band from an improvised comedy called This Is Spinal Tap. They had to have an entirely black album because the original artwork for their album was sexist, so they had to replace it with Nothing, and nothing is better than sexist, right? Their album was None More Black, famously. So the question is, was what Taylor Swift was doing deliberate? Was it a homage to this tradition in having entirely black artwork, if you're a musician like she is? Another clue was around this. I don't know if you've seen this meme format going around. So it's a political spectrum thing. So you plot authoritarian against libertarian and left against right. And just for fun, you put silly things in there. So you'd have like a libertarian left type of food or helicopter or something. In this case, it was music. And so in the top right region, there was like a really horrible Nazi punk band called Screwdriver. Don't buy their records, obviously. And the bottom left-hand corner, we had a 9-hour bongo jam. Right, which makes sense. But the best bit for me, and the most instructive bit for this course, obviously, is that in the top center it said, ideally silence, but in reality, Taylor Swift. That's the neutral option. So, maybe a developer at TaylorSwift.com decided to just do the right thing and eliminate Taylor Swift entirely and just replace Taylor Swift and her music and her whole celebrity and everything just with nothing. Kind of like when that person who lost their job at Twitter deleted Donald Trump's account, which was then unfortunately subsequently reinstated. But if that were the case, if that were their priority was just to eliminate it, then I don't think it would be a 300 kilobyte page. Completely black page, nothing there. When I showed you that picture, it wasn't just a shot of something happening between an animation. It wasn't just because it was loading slow. It was just a black website with no interface. At least I thought it was 300 kilobytes. I actually had Privacy Badger running. And when I turned that off, it turned out to be 800 kilobytes. 800 kilobytes you're downloading onto your phone or your device or whatever, for fucking literally nothing. Nothing. Who's ever played the game Populous? You're all fucking old. I've played Populous, I had Populous, I'm old too. Populous was a game in which you literally played a god and commanded the fates of multiple autonomous beings. It's pretty involved. A lot going on in that game. Smaller than Taylor Swift's website, which has fucking nothing in it. 512 kilobytes, fits comfortably on a floppy disk. Frontier Elite 2, who played that game? You're slightly younger. Okay. Frontier Elite 2, you got to explore an entire galaxy in 3 dimensions, or 4 dimensions if you include time. It's just a whole 3-dimensional matter thing that you got to interact with. Frontier Elite 2, 720 kilobytes, still smaller than Taylor Swift's website, which offers you nothing at all. Literally nothing. And yeah, so, I mean, in fairness, if the universe was entirely devoid of matter, the Big Bang hadn't happened, then playing Frontier Elite 2 would be very similar to visiting Taylor Swift's website, but that's not the case. One of the more interesting things about Taylor Swift's website, whilst it was in this phase of its design, was that the black effect, because of course by default you would just see white, wouldn't you, a white web page, was done using the wrong technology, JavaScript. And even though there's only 3 lines, barely 3 lines, written badly as well, there was absolutely no need for that immediately invoked function expression. Why? And the weird thing about that is if JavaScript isn't running, and there's a couple of scenarios where this can happen, either A, you've got a nag screen saying, oh, please, don't block our ads. And so you think, well, fuck it, I'll turn off JavaScript and then I won't get the nag because that's done with JavaScript. Or you don't have an ad blocker running and therefore the really bad third-party ads tracking code actually destroys the stack of scripts that you've got set up, and then your little tiny bit of coloring doesn't work. You literally get the opposite experience. So without JavaScript white, with JavaScript black. So there's a lesson there about depending too much on JavaScript, I feel. What can we learn from TaylorSwift.com? Fuck all. The reason is there's nothing there, but I'm being facetious. What can we learn about the fact that that was allowed to happen? Well, I think it's an indictment of late capitalism. Because if you get to a point where you can just exploit the inertia of celebrity and lure people like a fucking anglerfish to a place where there isn't anything for them, where there's no advantage for them to be there, and yet you still make money out of tracking their browser behavior and send it to your advertising partners, then I think their priorities of the people looking after that website were very wrong. And that, in a laboured way, is what the theme of the talk is. We can't do everything we want because, I mean, as designers or as developers or as people who are making things for the web, because we have limitations. We have budgets, which essentially means we don't have infinite money. We have time frames, which means essentially we don't have infinite time. We have limited resources of all kinds, staffing, technological, the physical constraints of the world around us. And we are expected to spend at least some of our time not coding, not learning all of the latest new technologies. Our families expect us to be near them physically and typically sit opposite them whilst we eat and watch them chew food. The problem isn't that we don't have these infinite resources. The problem is that with the limited resources we have, we're doing the wrong things. We're prioritizing things wrong. Some of the signs that your priorities might be out of whack, and probably not your priorities, but probably your organization's priorities or the web in general's priorities. You spend an inordinate amount of time discussing the relative merits of two very similar shades of red, and you use kind of pseudo-psychological justification for that kind of thing. So you might say the slightly more muted red on the left, because it's muted, it's not as aggressive, it instills trust in your customers, and because they trust you, they buy more things from you. Or, alternatively, you say the vibrant color on the right actually increases the user's metabolism, meaning they can stay up for longer and buy more products more enthusiastically. From the more sort of technological side, you might say something like this. Ultimately, re-implementing the application in Cycle.js is a net benefit to the user because its intrinsically reactive and functional nature makes my experience as a developer more ergonomic and therefore my productivity higher. Which is just a way of post-rationalizing playing with a new toy and having something else to put on your CV. We also, weirdly, from a design perspective, consider useful information clutter. We like things to be neat. Words get in the way. Words are ugly. We just like shapes and photos of cups of coffee and stuff like that. So we kind of get rid of things when it should be more on the nose. It should be more obvious. It should lead people better, so it's more usable. And ultimately, all of this stuff is placed into a monolithic system which becomes very precious about itself and demands constant maintenance, even though really what we're creating is usually quite ephemeral. It only lasts for a little while, and then we move on. There's a really good article recently by Jeffrey Zeldman that was just released on A List Apart. And he kind of talks about our obsession with complexity. And I think he makes a good point here. I think we're often drawn to complexity because it makes us look clever. Or it makes us more viable, maybe, in the eyes of other people as an employee. But actually, simplicity is what users want. Pixel perfection is something we get really, really obsessed with. You see it a lot in job listings. They say, we're looking for a pixel-perfect designer. Like, no one's ever placed all the pixels perfectly. Imagine if they already had, like, done that so far, how fucking nervous they'd be about getting that one pixel wrong and then no longer being able to say they're a pixel-perfect designer. By way of analogy, a long time ago, I worked on a really small project. And this project, it was to help vulnerable people who should probably be entitled to some benefits, access those benefits and qualify for them. This is in the UK. We have something called ESA and something called PIP. And if you're disabled maybe, or you have long-term mental health issues, that kind of thing, then you'd qualify for having this financial support because you can't work in the same way as other people, and you can't help that. Unfortunately, but probably quite deliberately, given the fucking arsehole right-wing government that we have, it was made really difficult for people to qualify, and what they did was genius from their point of view. They decided that people had to go into an interview in order to qualify for this stuff. These sorts of people don't interview well, for obvious reasons. So that was kind of cynical that they did that. There was actually a guy who turned up to one of these interviews, and the idea was that he would hopefully qualify for ESA, and he'd get that financial support. He didn't qualify because he actually had a muscular disease which caused his face to contort in such a way that it looked like he was smiling. And when he was interviewed, they just thought, he seems fine. So, pretty bad. So basically what we did, and it wasn't that ambitious, but we thought it might help on this small budget, we created a little app which just gave them questions to help them try and rehearse and go through the motions of this daunting and anxiety-inducing interview. It's basically like a pub quiz app, but for not dying of starvation. So it came to user testing, and we had 8 participants that we wanted to come along on a day and help us test our app. And believe it or not, 7 people dropped out. Of course they did. They're people with disabilities. They have, they just be tired maybe or anxious. They're not people who like doing this kind of thing. We understood it was totally cool. We tried to reschedule. We're obviously very understanding. One person did turn up, and it was a massive effort for them. In fact, when they turned up, it took them 5 minutes to get up one flight of stairs to where we were doing the testing. We checked in advance that there was no one who was a wheelchair user, so we thought it was okay to use stairs. But I learned a lesson there about invisible disability, because this person, by all intents and purposes, looked like he would be fine climbing stairs and doing that kind of task, and he wasn't. It took 10 minutes for him just to catch his breath after doing this. This is a person with very limited energy, suffers very easily from fatigue, but they were also someone who spent most of their life off the grid. Like, they weren't really interested in technology. They had few friends who they communicated with regularly. They were essentially a hermit, and they came with their first ever smartphone that they bought that week. It wasn't a smartphone I would have chosen, and I'll leave you to guess what it is. I'll reveal that later. So, the point is, in terms of UI, in terms of what we would provided for them, plotting what the feature is against how many fucks they would give about it. So, we'll just play a game here and you have to guess. Subtle drop shadows around buttons. 0 fucks. Golden ratio-based typographic rhythm. A mathematical, ancient approach to the way that the words were laid out. 0 fucks. -1 fucks, probably. Lifelike animation timing function. So this UI, which the idea of which is to ultimately help him get food, do you think he sat there and went, oh, it's a bit like fucking Disney, the way that moves around? 0 fucks. I think we say users first a lot, but I think we're kind of paying lip service to the idea of users. When we make stuff like that, those little nuances, those little delightful touches or whatever, we're just kind of saying, look at me, and we're saying that to other designers and other people we work with. Real people aren't looking to be delighted. And they're not looking for immersion either. They don't want to have this weird addictive experience. They don't want to be sucked in because they have a life, you know. Like, for instance, imagine if I was buying train tickets, and my approach to buying train tickets was to go, I'm looking forward to this. I'll set 4 hours aside for this, buying train tickets. I'm going to sit down, watch a few cutscenes, and hopefully, if the technology is advanced far enough, they'll be able to pump realistic-smelling steam from the USB port, and I can breathe that in. Or I could just buy some train tickets and get a fucking train somewhere. So people just want to get on with their lives, basically. I mean, for us, our lives are creating things and enjoying the nuances and the advancements of the technology we're using and the way it appears, but not for most of our users. Because they have limited resources, they have time frames, things to do, places to go, and they have family and friends who expect them to sit down opposite them and chew food. Incidentally, the phone that this guy brought to this session was a Windows phone. I had never held a Windows phone. Of course I've never held a Windows phone. I'm a developer. I've held an iPhone, I've held various Android phones. I've had a lot of Android phones over my years. And of course, if I'd taken a kind of exclusionary approach to the way I designed this application, then I would have been shitting it, because I would have thought, he's going to bring this out after this ordeal of getting up the stairs to test the thing, to find that it doesn't work, it doesn't lay out properly, or whatever. But I took an inclusive design approach to it, which is to not try and make it fit what I'm used to, but try and make it flexible in the way that it will work everywhere. It didn't look brilliant on the Windows Phone, nothing does, but it worked, and he could use it and he could get what he needed from it, and that's the important thing. So the lesson is, inclusive design is not giving everyone the same experience. That's impossible. It's giving as many people as possible a not shit experience. In terms of demographic, what you want it to be is that there's a small group of people who maybe you're familiar with and you can identify with. They have a good experience. Everyone else, they may be consume it in a different way. They have different devices. They might use assistive technologies like screen readers. They might be using it predominantly more at nighttime than daytime, all sorts of factors. But because it's flexible and because it's sort of inclusive, then they have a pretty good experience as well. What you want to avoid is this situation, where the few people you know are like, wow, this is great, this is the most amazing thing ever, and everyone else wants to throw you in a canal. Or to put it another way, if you have perfect eyesight, have excellent motor control and coordination, speak English as a first language, find reading and processing complex information easy, never get tired, have as much free time as you wish, live somewhere with access to super fast internet, can afford super fast internet, have a top of the... Has everyone already read to the bottom? Yeah, okay. If you have all of those things, then maybe you don't need inclusive design. But everyone falls into one sort of bracket, right, for the most part. That's a rare person, not an average person, and we get that wrong all the time. Is anyone here a lobster? Show of hands. That's more than I thought, actually. Couple of lobster interlopers here. Lobsters don't have senescence. Senescence is getting old. Some people kind of get carried away with this idea and think lobsters are immortal, which isn't true, because if they were, we'd be overrun by lobsters. It would be fucking crazy. But no, they don't get old. Like, they don't become decrepit like us. They don't have deteriorating vision and deteriorating cognitive capability, deteriorating bodies. We do, so as we get older, we benefit more and more from inclusive design. The other day, I was on Twitter, and there was a chap who was sharing his UI design insights and some little sort of tips to add a bit of refinement, I suppose, to interfaces in one way or another. And he was saying, well, the top one's okay, but the bottom one has that je ne sais quoi, because there's this subtle text shadow there. And I stepped in and I said, well, that's all very good, but in both cases, it fails color contrast. So the basic underlying problem, which is, can people read it, has not been addressed. It's just a refinement for people with very good eyesight in the first place. So it should look like that. Then the problem's solved. For everyone as well, not just for people who have low vision, because having really good vision doesn't suddenly mean you can't read that, right? That's why it's inclusive design. This was a good quote I read the other day, which kind of taps into this. No one cares what color the stitching is on the leather seats of your fancy concert car if it doesn't even have wheels yet. The fact that it kind of actually failed basic accessibility standards meant that it was kind of like it doesn't have wheels, because it actually just blocks some people out. Am I an arsehole? Yeah, I am an arsehole, because he was just sharing his tips and saying, hey, why not try this? It might enhance your interface. And it's not like he was making those interfaces worse. And he was sharing those tips for free. He's a nice guy. But your priorities, what you prioritize, betrays your privileges and your prejudices. If you have the time and the space to think about the little things, then you might be leading a sheltered life, is kind of the bottom line. For instance, in the UK recently, we decided that we'd leave the EU. And there's been a lot of excitement from some people about the fact that because we've now left the EU, we can change the colour of our passport from burgundy to blue. Now, if you're a multimillionaire who lives in an extremely safe and secure neighbourhood with lots of rich connections and an unlimited supply of private healthcare, you can afford to dick about with the idea of the colour of your passport. That would be a priority to you because you live a really sheltered life. And, as it turns out, you'll be willing to throw everyone else under the fucking bus in a massive economic collapse. Performance. Performance is really, really important. Performance is an inclusive design concern from two perspectives, really. First of all, if something is low performance, then it's difficult to access and it might not be easy to use. It will be janky and horrible to play with. But also, if you've got a load of code that you're asking the user to download, that might ruin their data contracts. That would mean that they've got to pay more money, and not everyone is a rich developer, right? But we go about dealing with performance in a way that's sort of, well, performative. We're just like, oh, I really care about performance, so therefore I'm doing all of this research and experimentation. But it's always into things that don't actually make much difference. Like, and I think Harry Roberts mentioned this for the keynote at the start of the conference, selector performance, CSS selector performance. So I'm going to show you how you can measure CSS selector performance in laboratory conditions, okay? So first of all, you need to get 6 million DOM nodes, put them all on one web page. Then you need to heat them up to 300 degrees C. You can't do that in a domestic oven. You'll have to get an industrial oven to do that. You put all of this into a 15-year-old browser because only 15-year-old browsers really are affected by this kind of thing anyway. Chuck all that shit in a large Hadron Collider and spin it round until it reaches the speed of just below the speed of light. And then if you're really lucky, you might be able to detect a difference in the time it takes to pass a dot class versus class with a child sibling, child, what's name? Basically, the lesson here is that just because something is measurable doesn't mean it matters. So just because you can see the difference in something doesn't mean you have to care about it, doesn't mean you have to write a bug about it in Jira, and it certainly doesn't mean you have to spend ages talking about it. You have to prioritize, right? When I talk about this, people kick back and they say, yeah, but if it is making a difference, like if it's better than it was before, that must be good. But no, but you have to prioritize because you don't have time to do everything. Because you have budgets and because time frames, you have limited resources and your family are wondering where the fuck you are. So prioritize, okay? So, to break it down, a low priority is filling all engineering, having data and charts to stick on your blog. I did this laboratory test about CSS selectors, whatever. High priority, making things more performant. And usually it's something really boring. Like, actually, if you've got 6 million DOM nodes, there's probably something wrong there anyway. And that actually can have weird effects on things. If you're updating the DOM in such a way that everything has to be kind of re-rendered into memory, then that's going to be a problem. And even if you're using virtual DOM, if someone's using a screen reader and they're interacting with the page, then that screen reader independently refreshes its version of the DOM in memory. And I was using an unoptimized Drupal site for some testing a long time ago, you know, where you just get countless divs before you presumably cut all of that stuff away and kind of pare it down. And I thought it was just inaccessible in the sense that the semantics were wrong, like the screen reader wasn't picking up on the markup properly and stuff. It just turned out that there was just too much lag. So huge DOMs can have a real impact. And use fewer fucking raster images. No one needs to see photos of things. People know what things look like. They've seen them in real life. You don't need to put them on your website. A picture of a cup of coffee that you're showing someone, they've probably seen one of those. Oh, yes, by the way, do you know why they call it a hero image? It's because the user says, thanks for the pointless 500 kilobyte image, you're a fucking hero. There you go. And it's always of something that you're looking at the time. So you'd only load it on desktop unless you're really crazy. You wouldn't want to load a huge image like that on mobile. So then the person who's looking at it would be sitting at a desk and they'd have the phone there and their laptop in front of them and their notepad and the wood. That's fucking there. That's in 3D. They're looking at it now. You don't, what? Yeah, anyway. So I get a bit. Who's heard of GDPR? Did you get my email? Right. Sometimes when you don't prioritize things, someone will prioritize them for you, basically. And you all heard the talk this morning, so the EU have decided we need to sort out the privacy situation, and they're right, and we have to face that. One interesting upshot of this was, you might have heard this story, USA Today, they didn't really know how to comply with GDPR, so they just decided that they would send a version of their site to the EU, which didn't contain any of the tracking or the advertising or any of the bullshit. So we get a better version. We get what that site should be, what the web should be like. So I like GDPR. I think that's great. To some extent, I think it's easy to get your priorities out of whack if you don't have kind of a direction in the first place. It's easy to sort of flit about and go, oh, well, I like this color and such and such. If you're, you don't have principles guiding you. And Ala Kolmatova, I've worked with recently, she does a really good talk about this in terms of design systems and kind of reducing down what it really is that your organization believes in and then driving everything from that. As a sort of complement, I suppose, I've been working on the inclusive design principles with some folks, some friends and colleagues at the Paciello Group, Ian Pouncey, Leonie Watson, and Henny Swan. And the idea of these is that they're just a basic starting point in terms of trying to create interfaces for people, but for lots of people, for as many people as you can, because it's the web, after all, it's supposed to be have as much reach as possible. And it has ideas in it like give control. So, really obvious example, don't eliminate pinch zoom on your phone. It's not just an accessibility concern. I mean, obviously, pinch zoom is great because it means you can zoom stuff in. If you've got poor eyesight, it's easier to then read things. But it's not just for people who have poor eyesight. It's for anyone who might want to expand things. Maybe they want to adjust something for a screenshot, or they have trouble targeting the button. So if they zoom in, it's easier to actually interact with. There's so many different reasons for that kind of stuff. Offer choice. So maybe you have a fancy drag and drop way of doing things, but that's only accessible or usable or even interesting to some people. Other people might want to just press a button to move things around. So you have both at the same time. They're just some ideas. So if you want to have a look at that, do. It's actually translated into Dutch. As you know, the British aren't very good at speaking other people's languages, but we've done our best. It's in Japanese as well. So go and have a look at them. Tell us what you think and get back to me. If you're more technical, I'm also doing a blog called Inclusive Components. And the idea is kind of remaking common design patterns and common components that we use all the time, but making them more inclusive and more robust. I'm going to release an article on cards soon, and there's a little snippet for the article here. It gets into kind of in the woods a bit and a bit of detail. I use the cascade here in such a way that I can use focus within, but with just a standard focus style fallback. So you get an enhanced version of focus, and that benefits keyboard users. That's at Inclusicomps. If you want to follow that on Twitter, there's a lot of stuff actually on the site already. I've kind of got a library of it, and I'm hoping to turn it into a book, just an ebook. Okay, so this is kind of like final remarks. The other day, I was watching TV, and I discovered it had this button, and I had discovered it had this button because I sat on my remote. And what happened when I sat on my remote was this, and I was horrified. It exited the program I was watching, which was really fucking rude, because I then had to go back into that specific application and put it back on again. And it said, "You are now entering football mode." And I thought, fuck you, because I don't like football. Like, I'm not going to begrudge anyone who does like football, but I really don't like football. Not interested in it at all. And there was a crowd cheering noise in the background. I thought, oh God, not this. This is, oh. And the weird thing was, though, I didn't notice anything really change that dramatically in the interface on my TV screen. It took me a long time to discover what football mode actually meant. Eventually, I opened up my volume control. You've probably seen something like this. You've got TVs, right? No. But so I was adjusting the volume and kind of sliding up and down as you do. The little arrow there points at the volume that you've selected. You know how these things work. Except in football mode, get this. Add footballs next to each one of the numbers. Not functional footballs, which did anything, which like made me go out and get some exercise when I pressed them or something like that. Just a decoration. The thing is, Samsung, I think it's Samsung, my TV, or someone somewhere is making this stuff, and it doesn't need to be made. Even if you're a fan of football, like, you're not going to go, "Oh, I like football, this is fucking great. This is amazing." Especially since it's exited you from the program you're watching when you switch it on. So I guess what I'm saying is, try to make things which aren't this kind of thing. It's a waste of time. You need to prioritize stuff which is important. The world is broken. There's so much stuff to fix. This shit doesn't need to happen. So yeah, there is plenty of stuff. There's the stuff that needs to be done. There's things that do matter. There's things that should be worked on. But there's not a lot of it, because most of everything around us is bullshit, isn't it, really? I'm kind of a pessimist, I suppose. But because not much of the good stuff exists, it means there is time to do it, as long as we actually aim to do those things. And in fact, there's so little of that good stuff that we even have a little bit of space and a bit of free time where we can be creative and experimental and have fun with things. For instance, I did a speculative redesign of the Taylor Swift website. Would anyone, I mean, it's got to be better than just a black screen, right, is what I was thinking. I wanted to contact them and say, "I've seen your current design for your website, and it's lacking, I think, in a number of areas, so why don't you try something different?" So I came up with this, which, to be honest, is an abomination. It's awful, but it's less than 100K, and it won't steal your fucking privacy. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks. We've just got a couple of questions, and there's a few incoming as well. Keep them coming for the time being. So one of them says, so basically you say prioritize what is necessary and then focus on the other stuff.
Yeah, it shouldn't have taken...
And another one that says, Heydon, can you give us your insights in using icons, which many clients want, for illustrating sections or navigations? Any good, waste of effort, accessible?
Better take the... Icons for sections and navigations. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, so icons do aid comprehension. And so I think icons are a good thing. It's usually a bad idea to have icons in the absence of text as well. I think having them, the text and the icon as being complementary things is your kind of robust, inclusive way of doing things, like what I was talking about. Because some people won't understand the icon, but then some people will have trouble kind of getting a general gist quickly if the icon isn't there. So I think both is best. I'm not quite sure what you mean by sections, but yeah.
That's it on the questions front.
Thanks for coming.